So, budget smartphones are all about focuses and compromises. It's looking down a list of specs that make up a phone and deciding what you can skimp on in favour of the essentials to make your vision of a decent budget blower a reality. And on the main hand, Realme has been pretty good at this. And I've already reviewed the Realme 8 Pro with its 108 megapixel camera, which you can watch by clicking the eye above my head. But today we're going to look at the rest of the Realme 8 line, featuring the Realme 8 and what the focus of this video will be, the Realme 8 5G, which, as you can guess, brings 5G networking to the party. And these two phones have their own sets of focuses and compromises, and yeah, it all gets a little confusing. So hopefully I can help you with that. And I will do so in the only way I know how, by answering a couple of simple questions. Is the Realme 5G a good, cheap 5G phone? Does the Realme 8 actually offer anything to give it a reason to exist alongside its two other brothers? And do they go some way to answering my key criticisms of the Realme 8 Pro? Let's get into it. Hey up, and welcome to New Rising Media, your home of hands-on reviews and gloves-off opinions about tech and gaming. I'm Jason England, all-round nerd journalist, and I thank you right there for taking the time out of your busy day to check out this video. Cheers. Right, the Realme 8 5G with just a little bit of a seasoning of the Realme 8. First off, a disclaimer and the price information. I got these phones from Realme and I've been testing these for about a couple of weeks now as my daily drivers. The Realme 8 comes in two options. There is one with 4GB of RAM and 64GB of onboard storage for £199. Increase the RAM to 6GB and double the storage and you're paying £229 for this. Meanwhile, the Realme 8 5G comes also in 4GB of RAM and 64GB of storage at £199, which makes this one of the cheapest 5G smartphones you can buy. It's certainly the cheapest I've seen, but if anybody can find any cheaper, let me know in the comments. And if you spend 50 quid more at £249, you can get the one with 6GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. You can get the Realme 8 in Cyber Silver or Cyber Black, or a Punk Black, which I assume is matte black. And you can pick up the Realme 8 5G in the Supersonic Blue or Black. So decent prices. Realme have never shied away from some good bargain bin prices, but do the specs match the investment here? And we'll find out by first talking about design. Shape-wise, they are both incredibly similar. They remind me a lot of the OnePlus 7T Pro. It's a very similar shape with the band around the middle. Obviously, this is a construction made of plastic, so it's not as premium as that, but these are pretty sturdy builds. The downside to the visuals, though, is the fact that they've gone for glossy backs, and as you can already see on these, they are insane fingerprint magnets. If that kind of thing is going to really bug you, then you do get a condom case in the box to keep it covered. But to the defense of using cheaper materials like plastic, you don't necessarily need to worry about a case, which for somebody as anxious as me, when I've got a particular flagship jewel in my hand and I need to put it in a case straight away, is a good thing. It's actually oddly liberating. Like, the only times I see the really nice blue shade of my iPhone 12 Pro is when it's in this tripod filming me. The rest of the time it's in a case. But I digress. In terms of size and weight, the Realme 8 comes in at 160.6mm tall, 73.9mm wide, and 7.9mm thin with a weight of 177 grams, whereas the 8 5G is just a little bit taller, as you can see. Only marginally so, at 162.5mm tall, just a little wider at 74.8mm and just a little thicker as well at 8.5mm with a weight of 185 grams. And despite the small increases in this one, they are both lightweight and both easy to carry and easy to hold, easy to use. Obviously, shape-wise, you're going to be using both hands to operate it most of the time, but it's a fine, if slightly chin-heavy size for what it is. Now, one of the big problems that I had with the Realme 8 Pro is that Dare to Leap branding. It's grim. And luckily, the 8 5G ditches it. Unfortunately, the Realme 8 doesn't. Like, why did they do this? I'll take you a little bit behind the curtain and talk to you a little bit about the review notes that we get. Basically 10 to 12 page documents that go into detail about the design process of this, the features of the phone, pricing and any testing that they've done. And here is what they say about the design. Printed slogan and logo elements of clothes, shoes and handbags are popular with big celebrities, street culture lovers and fashionistas. And we can often see them wearing them in airports, fashion magazines, or on social media. So what I'm sensing here is Realme have taken this trend in fashion and adapted it to phones, but here's the problem. While slogans and logos may work printed on clothing, they don't work on phones. To have a slogan on your phone is a slogan too many when you think about how many people may be wearing it at that time. So keep it basic next time, yeah? Now that we've got the look of the hardware out of the way, let's talk about what's inside and out and how do they translate into real world performance. I'll start by showing you what they both have. They both have 3.5mm headphone jacks, dual SIM support and a micro SD card slot in the tray to support up to 1TB of storage. A big thumbs up for that. And briefly about the Realme 8, it features a MediaTek Helio G95 system on a chip with an octa-core processor clocked at up to 2.05 GHz, alongside an ARM Mali G76 MC4 GPU. As I mentioned in the price bit, up to 6 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage. Now, component names aside, real world use, it's fine. The display up front is the same as what you got on the 8 Pro, that 6.4-inch Full HD Plus display, Super AMOLED, 60Hz, fingerprint sensor under the screen, and a 1000 nit peak brightness, which is fine. Obviously the same criticism as before about the display. I would love a high refresh rate, but it's fine for what it is, and it's pretty vivid and nice and colourful. And while the internals are not the fastest, it's perfectly fine for the day-to-day use. Just expect maybe a little bit of slowdown if you're playing anything particularly graphically intense or doing a fair bit of multitasking between CPU intensive apps. But what about the star of the show here? Inside, there's a Dimensity 700 5G CPU with an octa-core processor clocked at 2.2 gigs and an ARM Mali G57 GPU. This is a step back from the last generation where you got a Dimensity 800U. Now don't get me wrong, the differences performance-wise are small enough that in real world you won't necessarily tell the difference, but you'll see it in Geekbench scores if stats are your thing. And then of course up to 6 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage. Jobs are good. Decently responsive to use, and obviously the benefit of 5G data speeds, which for me in Nottingham, I don't necessarily see it that much, but I assume when I go to bigger cities with bigger 5G infrastructure, then I may be able to see the vast increases in data speed, who knows. But for the core day-to-day, it's fine. Same as this. Don't expect it to break records. Just does the job. And the screen, here's where things get interesting, because on one hand, they've listened to my criticism. You get a 90Hz refresh rate on this IPS display. The difference in smoothness between this and the 8 is night and day. Again, a step back from the Realme 7 5G that had a 120Hz refresh rate, but I'll appreciate smoothness whatever I can get. However, with it being an IPS panel, the colours are a little bit drained. There isn't the same contrast as you get on a Super AMOLED, and with a peak brightness of 600 nits, this isn't that great in direct sunlight. Also, with it being an IPS panel, they weren't able to put an under-screen fingerprint reader, so you'll find it in the power button. So all in all, it's okay. It's odd to see the new phone have weaker specs, but price-wise it makes sense. If you want better specs, go for the next one up. It's just that display though, man. I would have loved to have the best of both worlds. I would love to have the great colour and contrast with the better refresh rate. Now, we know the internals are just about up to the task, but what about the software on these? Now, the same as the 8 Pro, they are both running Realme UI 2.0 skinned over Android 11. So everything should be virtually identical, right? Well, don't get me wrong, they are both zippy in usability. They have some of the best and easy to use customization features. And in terms of nipping between menus and stuff, everything moves around really zippy and fast. It's all good. But, and I'll prep you up by saying, with a budget phone, you expect some degree of bloatware. It's an inevitable thing. It's something that hardware makers will do to kind of cover some of the costs of the phone's manufacturing, make a deal with an app developer here or there. The Realme 8 Pro had some, but most of it was easy to uninstall. The Realme 8 is actually surprisingly clean. There's a few, but nothing too drastic. The Realme 8 5G, on the other hand, is packed to the gills with bloatware. A good chunk of it cannot be uninstalled, and some of it is just downright deceptive. Two folders, I'll hold this up to the camera, called Hot Apps and Hot Games. Those are not folders, they are separate apps to go in and download other apps. So it's an app within an app. And they put these notification bubbles next to them to make you think, oh, there's a notification, I'm gonna tap into that. It's bullshit. It just kind of spoils it for you. I get that there are costs that need to be recouped when you're making a budget phone, but surely that doesn't come at the behest of the actual user experience. So I'm not here spending an hour when I first got the phone uninstalling everything. You know what you should do? You should offer two versions of the phone on your website. You should offer one with all the bloatware and one without, because I'll be more than happy to spend just a little bit extra to have the Realme 8 5G with none of the bullshit. But rant over, what about the battery life? Now, this is the bit that I get to say some really good stuff about these two, because they both have massive 5,000 milliamp hour batteries in, which is impressive for two phones that you can get for under £200. The Realme 8 comes packaged with a 30-watt dart charger for faster charging. I managed to get this to 100% in around about an hour and 15 minutes. The Realme 8 5G comes with an 18-watt charger in the box, so you don't get those same fast charging times, but you can get it to 100% in around about 3.5 to 4 hours. So not terrible, but definitely slower. And when you look at the battery testing specs that Realme sent over, this promises 16 hours of video playback, 114 hours of music, and 655 hours of standby time. Now, they are just numbers. In the day-to-day use, this does pretty well. So on my average working day of plenty of social media use, lots of email checking and responding, a few calls, some photography when I'm going out walking, and listening to podcasts while I'm out and about and when I'm working at my desk. By the end of the day, I'm left with around about 25 to 30% left on my battery, which is pretty impressive given that there is a 90Hz display in here and a 5G radio. And saving what I think is the most important bit for last, what are the camera systems like? On the Realme 8, stands up pretty well. Quad camera setup. You don't get the 108 megapixel sensor, but the main shoot you get here is 64 megapixels, which is pretty decent. You also get an 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro, and a 2 megapixel style lens. And up front, you've got a 16 megapixel selfie lens. And when you take the features and the gimmicks out of here, when you've used your time lapse once and then never used it again, when you're using this as your day-to-day shooter, it's good. It's not great, it's not fantastic, but for shots of your friends and family, for a little bit of video, thanks to the 4K 30 capability, frame rate wise going all the way up to 720p, 120 frames a second, this does a decent enough job of capturing your day-to-day. The camera system always favors to make things look a little bit too colored, whereas personally I like things a bit more true to life, but for what it is, it's fine. It's a decent camera and also has a pretty good night mode on it too. And that's where I turn my attention to the Realme 8 5G. And it's not great. You see, this is where the whole thing starts to fall apart. I will start with the good bit. The 16 megapixel selfie camera, the same as Realme 8, is fine. It does pretty decent portrait mode photos. Now for the important bit around the back of this, you have a triple camera array. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why is there 4 rings on here? But you take a look at the top one, just at the top left over there, and you'll see that that's actually a logo. And the weird choices don't stop at fobbing us off with a 4th circle. Because you've got a 48 megapixel main shooter, which I'll go into how that does in a little bit. But for the other lenses, you get 2 megapixel macro lens and the 2 megapixel black and white style lens. Why did they not put an ultra wide in this? I mean, the Realme 7 5G picked an ultra wide camera. Surely it wouldn't have been that much of a problem to put one in there? I mean, seriously, are there a lot of people who really like taking black and white photos? That is a preference over a telephoto or an ultra wide? Am I surrounded by a bunch of new age Ansel Adams and I didn't even know it? If you look at this and think, yes, that is what I want, let me know in the comments. It's a baffling decision to me. And then we look at video recording, which this supports 1080p at 30 frames a second, which is odd given that the Realme 7 5G has a 48 megapixel sensor and can do 4K. And the video, as you can see, is just a bit of a shaky mess. It doesn't really know how to deal with differing light sources around me. The microphone, as you can hear, is just a bit muffled. It's not good. Maybe in a software update at some point, this all gets ironed out, but day-to-day photo-wise, the photos are passable. Obviously, 48 megapixels gives you quite a bit of detail, but the aperture means that there's a fair bit of noise around photos. The results are just inconsistent. And I don't know, maybe I'm being too harsh on this. Maybe this is just a compromise that they've made to put 5G networking in a phone for under £200. But then again, I'm thinking one of the biggest use cases for any phone is the camera. Even if they just gave us one camera, even if they just took the 64 megapixel sensor off here, slapped it onto the back and ditched the rest of this bollocks, then it would still be a better camera system than what we got here. It's just unfortunate how much of an own goal this is when you think about the focuses and the compromises that you have to make a budget phone good. And the choices here really harm the balance that they were going for. So where does all of that leave us? Well, I'll give you a quick sum up of the Realme 8 first before we talk about the big boy here. Because it turns out this is probably, out of all the Realme 8 phones at the moment, the one that I would go for. It is the most balanced phone of the range. If you're not looking for a phone that goes in hard on one or two key things at the expense of everything else, if you just want something that is a balanced experience, whatever you do with it, get the Realme 8. It just gives everything the same amount of attention. And I know I'm recommending the phone with the Dare to Leap branding, but just get a case or something, or if you're not as offended by this as I am, this is a nice all-rounder. But of course, our focus is on the Realme 8 5G. This is a cheap 5G phone through and through. And if you're one of a very select audience who thinks, I need a 5G phone for as cheap as possible, no matter what the rest of the specs are like, get this. Because a 5G phone for under 200 quid is a pretty good deal. But Realme have taken the pros and cons of the 8 Pro and, to paraphrase Blazing Squad, they've reversed them. This brings a 90Hz refresh rate, 5G networking, and a big 5000 mAh battery at the expense of decent display color gamut and a decent camera, and everything has taken a step back since the Realme 7 5G. So it makes this very difficult to recommend. If you need a Realme 5G phone right now and you can spend the extra 80 quid, get the Realme 7 5G. It has a slightly faster processor, it's got an ultra wide lens rather than these two silly little things, and a 120Hz display up front. It's a marginally better all-rounder, but the compromises here just make it feel half finished. And at a time when other budget smartphone makers are doing amazing things, that's just not enough anymore. So who knows, maybe next time Realme will give us the best of both worlds. Maybe it will give us that much rumored Realme 8 Pro 5G, and hopefully they get rid of the Dare to Leap branding on it. But in its current state, it's pretty tricky to recommend the Realme 8 5G to anybody who isn't just desperately looking for a £200 5G phone. Right, that's the end of that. What do you think? Are you still keen on getting a Realme 8 5G? Maybe a camera is not necessarily a problem for you. Maybe you've got yourself a nice point and shoot that you take out with you and you just want something cheap and cheerful with 5G networking. Or maybe you've completely subverted your expectations when you were there thinking, I'm probably going to want to get the Realme 8 5G, and then you're coming out at the end of this video thinking, I just want the Realme 8. Go ahead and let me know in the comments. And as always, like if you enjoyed the video, subs if you loved it, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.